Hi everyone, welcome to our Premed Conference. My name is Arushi and I'm the founder of Aspiring Doctors. I'm so glad that all of you could make it today. Please make sure that your camera and microphone are turned off, and let's get started. So I would like you guys to introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Rachel. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey guys, I'm Rachel. I'm a senior neuroscience major and chemistry minor at Rhodes College, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you today.
Awesome, thank you. Next, we have Elise.
Hey everybody, I'm so excited to be here as well. I'm currently a second year master's in medical physiology student here at Case Western Reserve University, and I'm super excited to talk to you guys today.
Awesome, and lastly, we have Tiffany.
Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany. I am a DIY postbac student at UCLA Extension. I previously graduated from the University of California, Irvine, and I'm best known on social media as my Instagram account at Arguing for Medicine. So excited for your guys' questions today.
Great. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your busy days to be here with us. And let's get started. So our first question is, how did you know that the medical field was right for you?
I can go ahead and get started, at least with that discussion.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. I will go ahead and start off. I always knew that I wanted to work with patients in some type of capacity because my mom was a pharmacist. I wasn't sure in what type of field. And ultimately, through my work in a student-run free clinic and working with those in the population, especially specifically the homeless population, as well as those who are undocumented, I came to realize that medicine was something that I really strived to do, and I wanted to be able to help these patient populations in any way I could. That doesn't mean it wasn't without struggle. I definitely had a hard time in college doing long classes, balancing work, etc. But you know, I think ultimately I decided, and I did also have doubts. I thought about potentially going into healthcare law because I really wanted to make an impact on these patients. But after shadowing lawyers and both physicians and as well as my other experiences, I decided that going into medicine, specifically being a physician, was the path for me because I wanted to be able to not only take action into my own hands and help these patients through clinical practice, but as well also inspire others by teaching them through the journeys that I've taken through medicine, and then inspiring other people to follow the same path.
Would anyone else like to share a little bit about what made you want to go in the medical field?
Yeah, absolutely. The initial spark that sort of drew me to medicine occurred when I was 13 years old. My father actually passed away from hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And having that experience and being involved with the healthcare team in that capacity really inspired me to want to help others in that way. But as an adult starting college, I didn't think it was an option for me. I didn't have anyone in the medical field in my family. I didn't have a great support system. So I started out as a business major. My family wanted me to do something safe, didn't want me to do something where I wouldn't feel like secure. And of course, the road to medical school is not always easy and it's not always straight from point A to point B. So that wasn't a very supported option for me. But as a junior business major, I switched to pre-med without a whole lot of research, but knowing that it was the right path. How I confirmed that was through shadowing, working in a clinical position, and finding great mentors along the way. Some qualities about being a physician that resonate with me are obviously the love of helping others, empathy, and compliance. But some of the more unique qualities about being a physician include the autonomy of practice, their level of expertise, being able to perform surgery, just because that is something that I was interested in, um, the leadership, and the accountability as well.
Great, thank you so much. All right, let's move on to the next question, which is, what's the timeline for applying to medical school?
I can go ahead and get started with that discussion. So essentially how I ask people to think about applying for medical school is first to think about when you want to start medical school, and then work a year backwards from that. So for example, for myself, I hope to be in medical school in the fall of 2022. So if I work a year back from that, I would officially be applying in the spring of 2021, which is what I'm doing currently. So from there, work your way backwards from that. It takes an entire year to apply for medical school. So in my opinion, it takes an entire year to prepare your application. That can mean those can include things such as preparing letters of recommendation, so finding professors or those in the community who can speak highly of you. So most medical schools require at least 3, if not more. Beyond that, taking the prerequisite classes, which I know is another question coming up. Every school has a little bit of a different requirements for their medical school applicants. So just check with each one of those schools. Getting clinical experience, community service, basically doing activities that you're very passionate about, and taking the Mcat. For me personally, I always tell people to take the Mcat at least before April of the year you're applying, so that you have a chance to take a look at your score. And then from there, once May or June hits, that's officially when med school applications open. You submit your primary application, secondary applications follow shortly after, which are basically additional essays from from specific medical schools to get to know more about you. Then interviews come mid-summer, early fall, and then acceptances start to roll in. So just a general gist of the timeline for medical school applications.
All right, next question is, what are the prerequisites to have when applying to medical school?
I can go ahead and answer this one. Generally, you've got the same baseline sort of requirements for medical school, including like 2 semesters of biology with labs, the same for chemistry, physics classes as well. But it's so important to check your school websites. This can vary a little bit from school to school, including organic chemistry labs might vary. I think that's one that tends to vary the most, if that's required or not. So my best advice for that is to look at like your top schools and just make sure based on their website that you're on track. But you can also look at MSAR to check that out as well.
Awesome, thank you. The next question is, what are your success tips to do well in college?
Okay, well, I could start off this one again. Generally speaking, the advice that I give to any college students is counterintuitive because the word success is in there for this question, but it's not to not be afraid to fail. I personally think that most high school students go into college being relatively super successful in high school, and they never had to deal with major rejections or major failures. And so going into college the first time, you're going to hit classes, coursework, exams that you're just going to feel completely thrown off and out of your element. Failing is very normal actually in college. College is a time for growth. So generally the one piece of advice that I give to any incoming college student or college student now is just to not be afraid to fail and to use those failures to fuel your next steps forward. Don't think about them as holding you back, but think about them as something that's helping you to lift you towards achieving your goals.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to share their success tips?
Sure. I definitely want to echo Tiffany that failure is so normal. I made it to college and had not really failed it too much yet, and definitely learned that lesson fairly quickly. I had succeeded as a business major, and so it was very new for me to switch over to taking all science classes. And I did not do that well, and it was very shocking for me. And I had to learn very quickly how to come back from that, how to adjust, time management, things like that. College is definitely for growth. I totally agree with Tiffany on that. I also want to say that something I didn't have in undergrad that I have now that has made such a huge difference is better advising, which is not always something that we can control, but sometimes we can look outward, either checking in with different advisors at your school if you're not really satisfied with the help that you're getting currently, or even looking outward for different organizations, and definitely finding mentorship. Something that has been huge for me is being involved with AMWA, but there are plenty of pre-health, pre-med organizations that are there to help you, support you, and encourage you. And that is so important, just having someone there to kind of root for you, especially through those failures, just to keep going and have someone there that's like rooting for you. I think that's really helpful.
Sure, thank you so much for sharing. All right, our next question is how to choose a major, science versus non-science.
Yeah, I'll take this one. So honestly, it doesn't matter. Med school is super nice in the fact that you can choose whatever major you are most passionate about, most interested in. I came in knowing that I was for sure going to be a neuroscience major. I knew that since high school, so that was something I think I had the privilege of, and so I only applied to schools with the major already there, at least. But not everybody does that. Some people end up changing their major, and that's totally fine. Like Elise said, like she found what she was passionate about, and that's super great. And that's the whole point of it. As long as you get those STEM courses that Tiffany talked about earlier, you will find that you can get everything you kind of want in a way. Neuroscience kind of helped me with that because it was already implemented. So I didn't have to get a bunch of extra courses. I was just already on track. But I also took a ton of other liberal arts. My school is a small liberal arts school. And so I took a ton of extra courses like art and English and all kinds of other things. I took some music stuff as well. You can do kind of anything as long as you get those courses. So my biggest recommendation is to just go for what you're passionate about, and you'll have so much to talk about when it comes time for application season.
Thank you. All right, let's see. Next question is how to find research opportunities in college.
So for research, I got into it a little late in the game. I waited until my junior year to kind of start asking around. I wanted to kind of get my feet wet with making sure I could make sure that my GPA was starting to get on track and that I felt comfortable enough to be able to do all the things that you have to do as a pre-med. So once I felt comfortable enough, I started asking around at my school. And so at that point, I just kind of looked online at my school's website at all the different professors. You can usually find descriptions of like their general research or maybe papers, that sort of stuff. And then you make an appointment with that professor, usually via email, kind of just saying like, hi, like I'm interested, love to come talk to you, read your paper, something along those lines. And they're almost always so eager to talk to you about their research. It's awesome. And at that point, usually you can ask them if they have a spot open. If they do, they'll say yes. If they don't, they'll say no. But I always use that as an opportunity to kind of open more doors by basically saying, well, do you happen to know anyone else that their interest is similar or that I'd be interested in and that you could point me to? And so that's kind of what I did. And I ended up finding not one, but two research groups that I love and cherish with my whole heart. And that's how I found them. But Elise, maybe you could offer another perspective.
Yeah, sure. I actually was not involved in research in undergrad. I switched my major very late in the game. I was trying to play catch up. I was working full time. I was at a very small school in rural Kentucky, and there was no research hospital I just didn't really have a lot of opportunities. The labs tended to like get handed down from student to student, like through friend groups. So there just wasn't a big opportunity there. Now that I'm at Case Western, we have the Cleveland Clinic, we have University Hospitals and Metro Health, which are all teaching hospitals that have plenty of research opportunities. I got very lucky in the sense that our program received a request for students to start working in the cardiac surgery research. And that was super exciting to me because I love cardio. So it was kind of a perfect fit, and I've been doing that for a few months now. But I completely agree with Rachel. And I know Tiffany has so many posts on this that are so helpful. To just reach out. If you can find either through a research hospital near you or at your university if it's available, just finding either physicians or professors that have research areas that interest you, and just emailing and asking if they would want to talk about that, if they have availability, and if they have any spots in their lab. And I think that's probably the best way to go about it for me anyways.
I was just going to add as well that you don't necessarily have to do medical-based research. I think med schools just generally look, as I tell people that I mentor, I think the idea of research is you're able to scientifically communicate what you're basically studying. And it shows a lot in the medical school interview, whether or not you can talk passionately about your research and you can talk about it with gusto and you can talk about it on and on and on. Because I want people to stop thinking about research as like a checkbox, because like for all of us, like that's most of us who go into the pre-med world know that, you know, research is one of those things you tick off to make sure you're competitive. But ultimately, I think a lot of times research is lost upon those who are listening upon it if you don't have the enthusiasm behind it, if you don't break it down simply enough. And I think that enthusiasm shows regardless if you're doing, cardio research like with Elise, or you're doing neuroscience research like Rachel. With myself, I did, I also did clinical research at a med school, but I also did political science research. And oftentimes my political science research is the one that gets asked about the most, and I love talking about it. So just make sure when you are finding that research opportunity to do something that you're passionate about, or if you don't have a strong passion for it, like with myself and the lab that I joined at the med school, learn to have a passion for it, learn everything about it, and learn how to communicate that passion across to other people. So generally, that's the tip for that.
All right. The next question is, what are different ways to get clinical experience?
So there are a ton of ways to get clinical experience, thankfully. You can either get clinical experience as broad two categories that I'll discuss today, either through volunteering or through paid positions. Just for the sake of time, I am going to talk about paid positions, just because that's what I have the most experience with personally. I've worked as a resident assistant in a nursing home. This was like a locked dementia facility, so I worked with dementia patients. I worked as a nursing assistant in a hospital setting. My home base was the maternity unit, but I was also floated to the rest of the hospital. Like I said, rural hospital. They kind of just put us where we were needed. We had like a progressive care unit, a medical floor, and a surgical floor. And lastly, I worked as a medical assistant and secretary in an OB/GYN office. The most common jobs that you would see pre-meds have, but obviously this is not an exhaustive list, would be like a CNA or patient care tech, phlebotomy, medical assistant, emergency medical technician, scribing, and clinical research. The definition of clinical experience sort of varies depending on who you ask and what medical school you're applying to. But some questions that you can ask yourself to decide if like an experience would be considered clinical, because I think this is like a huge question I see in pre-med forums, or something that people ask me is like, does this job count as clinical experience? So two questions I would ask are you interacting directly with the patient? Some people say like, are you close enough to smell the patient? But I think another important question is, are you part of the clinical team? Because plenty of physicians, such as like dietary or housekeeping, which are both incredible and very, very needed positions, get close to patients, but they're not doing clinical tasks. So I think those are important questions. to consider when you're trying to figure out if a job is clinical. As far as like certification requirements, because some of these jobs do require certifications, I think it's always best to check if job listings have a certification as a requirement. And you can always reach out to HR or the hiring manager to see if they would certify you. For example, many nursing homes offer training and certification as far as a nursing assistant goes, and you can actually be paid while you get certified. It's also possible to pay to take these kinds of courses at a community college or university, but that does cost money. So I would always recommend trying to find a job that doesn't require certification first before you pay for the course. Although that might not be a concern for you, but I'm very low SES socioeconomic status student, so it was a concern for me when I was looking at jobs. And as far as trying to find a clinical job, I would recommend searching the websites for your local hospitals, for local nursing homes, and things like that, and just applying broadly. It took me about a year to get a job at the hospital, and it's not a very big hospital, so there weren't a lot of positions open. But once you have a little bit of experience, it kind of opens up doors and you've got connections, and it's a lot easier as time goes on and as you grow as you pre-med.
Thank you. So the next question is tips for shadowing a doctor.
Yeah, I can go ahead and take this one. Actually, I did not have shadowing prior to the pandemic, so I actually found my shadowing during the pandemic. So I think I have a little bit of a different take on it. But generally, the tip for first finding a doctor to shadow is to reach out. I have email templates all over my Instagram page, literally the exact screenshot of what I sent to doctors. But generally in these emails or even in these cold calls to private offices, you basically just want to explain very briefly who you are, why you're interested in the office. And, I'd love, and just basically explain that you'd love to have an opportunity to learn from this provider and maybe perhaps show a personal connection to their specialty, whether it's family med or internal med or endocrinology, etc. When you're at the office to shadow a physician, I always recommend people to bring a small notebook, to dress business casual, closed-toed shoes. Basically, you want to dress as if you're going to like a chemistry lab, but just more professional in that aspect. Don't speak unless spoken to, and don't interrupt the physician when they're speaking with the patient. You're basically supposed to be a fly on the wall, observing the interactions. And if the physician invites you at the very end to ask the patient a question or to ask questions, that would be the time to ask questions. But generally, you just want to be out of the way, observing, and not really being a nuisance, because ultimately what you're there to do is just observe what the physician does on a day-to-day basis and their interactions with the patients. Beyond that, I think it's a little bit different. I would say it's a little bit easier to shadow at private practices versus at hospitals, because hospitals, you tend to need to have certifications and ID badges and such. So I would say if you are looking for someone to shadow now, reach out to private offices, because I know starting now, offices are beginning to go back to in-person patients, no longer telehealth. So you might have more luck now if you're searching for those shadowing opportunities.
I just wanted
oh
sorry.
sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Just one super quick thing. From working in the OBGYN office, I learned that a lot of the times the person that is handling the shadowing and coordinating, as well as like getting you any like certifications with the hospital, is the office manager. So I actually started like reaching out to office managers, as well as sometimes larger hospitals have like an education department. And they can oftentimes put you in touch with the doctors that like they know like students, that might cut down on a little bit of time, because not all doctors love students or want to have shadowing, which is totally okay. But just a little extra tip, but I totally agree with everything that Tiffany said.
And to add to that, an extra after tip, I guess, is to journal your experiences. I've been on and off journaling since basically high school about my experiences at clinics and shadowing all the doctors, and that has actually become super helpful for this upcoming application cycle as I start writing all of my activities and specifically about my shadowing experiences. Like, you forget things over time. You'd be surprised all the things you forget. So it's really nice to have them written down to refresh your memory and to also remind you almost why you're doing all of this. It's very helpful for that as well.
Thank you guys so much for sharing your tips. Next question is, what are the topics covered on the MCAT and how to prepare for it?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So I actually haven't taken the MCAT yet, but I wanted to talk about the how I'm preparing for it and all the different topics that are covered. So on the MCAT, there's 4 different sections, and they're all roughly 90 to 95 minutes each right now. They were a little shorter during COVID, or during last cycle of COVID, essentially. But right now the test sits at about 7.5 hours, depending if you add this seated time, essentially. But the 4 sections are psychology and sociology, CARS, which is essentially critical reading and analysis skills, and then biology, biochemistry, and chemistry and physics. And chemistry also includes your general chemistry and also organic chemistry, which is my favorite. And so within those different topics, you're going to have about 59 questions, if I remember correctly. So 59 questions roughly, I think, except for CARS, which is around 53. And I'd say, to me, CARS is like probably the most fun section, but I think everybody has a differing opinion. I think you need CARS understanding for all of the different sections. It's very important to be able to critically analyze the things you're reading and to understand why it's important. And as far as the MCAT goes, for the STEM courses that you take that we mentioned earlier, all of those courses are supposed to prepare you for the MCAT, but that does not mean that you still don't have to study for it. So something I recommend because of that is to plan out your studying early. You don't have to keep those notes if you don't want to. Some people find that helpful from those prior courses, but honestly, you'll most likely use some form of a book set from Kaplan or Blueprint or Princeton Review or something along those lines, and you'll figure out you're studying X amount of days, weeks, months, whatever time you can spare, essentially, before the date that you end up choosing. And then at that point, you can figure out how to divvy up your schedule, essentially. So the 3 different parts of the schedule, at least for me, is content review. So pure content review for about 1/3 of it. In the middle somewhere, you're going to do almost exclusively practice questions. But personally, I recommend just practice questions the whole time. It's just necessary. But at that point, you're probably going to be starting to incorporating practice tests. And this can be done by buying them and from different places, or you can make them via UWorld, which is just, gosh, it's a beautiful, beautiful website. I highly recommend it. I love it so much. And you'll probably hear that from others. And then the last 1/3 of your schedule should pretty much purely be AAMC content, which the AAMC they're the people who made the MCAT, and they have all kinds of great things on their website to be able to use to prepare for the MCAT. So they have a bunch of practice tests that are, repeat the website. You should be able to look up AAMC, yes. and you'll find all of that information. There's also UWorld, like I said, and that's pretty easy to find as well. Yes. But yeah, so when it comes time for the AAMC information, you're hopefully within a few weeks of your exam and you're ready. That will tell you probably the most about how close you are to actually your goal score, which I recommend kind of everyone having like a range or a score that they're comfortable with, either based off of their GPA. So like my GPA was a little bit lower starting off, so I'm trying to aim for a higher score to try to kind of even it out in a way. But it can't always be evened out if you're below a certain threshold, and that's a whole nother conversation. But I really recommend preparing early, understanding that sometimes this takes longer than 3 or 4 months, like some people say it does, and that's totally okay. Try your best to get ahead in the sense of knowing that this can cost money, a lot of it sometimes, and being prepared for that as well is key if you can. If you need to apply for the financial aid assistance program through the AAMC, you can get a lot of money kind of taken off of the amount it costs to even just take the Mcat, as well as preparing for it. So I highly recommend doing stuff like that to ensure that you can pay for everything, and that hopefully there's one less burden on you during this whole process. But yeah, does anybody have anything else to add? I feel like I just said so many things.
I was just going to add that you do not have to buy the book your freshman year. Buy the book when you're ready to study, because honestly, and I know like everyone wants to be prepared ahead of time, but when you get to the point where you need to study, you're going to be relearning everything. And I mean that wholeheartedly. Like no matter how well you do on these classes, it is an entirely different process to study for the Mcat. So do the best you can, like Rachel said, do the best you can in your prereqs, because that will best prepare you for eventually seeing the material again. But don't be, if you're a freshman right now, you don't need to be buying the book and highlighting it and taking notes ahead of time, because ultimately, and I put it in this way, in 3 years' time, are those notes still going to be relevant to you? So take your time in it. I'm also studying for the Mcat as well. My exam will be in April. And I would just say that for anyone who is preparing to study for it, I'm on a gap year currently, so I'm actually working full-time while studying for my Mcat. Just be aware that, if you're taking your Mcat while you're truly adulting and you're paying for rent and you're paying for bills, just give yourself more additional time. And I think beyond that, I would say just be aware of what resources you use, because not all resources are the same. The double AMC is like the gold standard, and all the other resources, while they are great and people have great reviews on them, they're not truly they're not truly questions that were used on the Mcat. So just be aware of that when you are buying things, and do your due diligence and research to make sure you're using your money in the best way possible.
Awesome. Let's move to the next question, which is, any advice when preparing for an interview? Specifically the medical school interview.
What was that? I'm so sorry, I talked over you.
Oh, nothing. I was just saying, like, for the interview, they're talking about, like, specifically the interview to get into medical school.
Okay. So I can go ahead and start. I wrote out some notes for myself because there's just so much to talk about when it comes to an interview. My first tip would be to research common questions for interviews and practice answering them. Before my mock interviews, I gave my friends a list of common questions that I got from Dr. Gray's medical school interview book, and I just practiced answering those. That was the first thing I did in preparation for the interview. Second would be to take advantage of mock interviews. I cannot stress this enough. I thought that I was so good at interviews because I'm usually very good in like job interviews, but a medical school interview is very different. Take advantage of those mock interviews. First, I completed a mock interview with Career Services here at Case Western. Then I completed one with my advisor, and finally I completed a mock with my friend who is a medical student at the school that I was interviewing for. It is so, so important to be able to talk about yourself and your journey. Ironically, one of like the biggest struggles that I get or that I have with interviews is talking about myself. You know, you're like taught growing up, like it's kind of rude to like talk about yourself or talk about your accomplishments. But get used to doing that. Obviously, stay humble, but just be able to talk about yourself and your journey. And be familiar with your application and personal statement. That is all fair game in an interview. Different schools will have different interview types. They'll have, they might be completely open to your file. They might be completely closed to your file. They might have access to your personal statement, but not to your grades. And you can usually figure that out online or reach out and ask the admissions office. Something else that's important that I had not thought of is to stay up to date on current events and the bigger healthcare policy news. I'm not saying that you have to know everything about current healthcare policy, but for currently anyways, I would say definitely know like the top main points about the Affordable Care Act, bare minimum. I would definitely know that. Another thing is not to talk about something if you're not entirely sure what it is. My friend, whom I love dearly, that gave me the mock interview that's a medical student, she very purposefully was really tough on me in this mock interview. And I do care deeply about public health and healthcare disparities. And I mentioned something along the lines of redlining, which I generally speaking knew what it was. Could I give you an exact definition at that moment? Probably not. I made it work when she asked me about it, but as soon as I said like redlining, that was like a hot word for her. And she was like, explain what redlining is. So don't do something stupid like that where you're like, you kind of know what it is, but you could also kind of get yourself in trouble. Stay away from stuff like that. But that's also why it's pretty important to stay up to date on public health and healthcare policy news. It's also important to find out what your nervous tics are. For example, I tend to tuck my hair behind my ear. You will notice that my hair is pinned back. I also adjust my glasses quite often just because they slide down my nose. For my interview, I did not wear my glasses, but right now I'm trying to read my screen, so I don't really have an option. But just like ask your mock interviewers, most of them will know to look out for that and to help you. But you can also record yourself talking, which is very painful to watch back, I will tell you right now. But it's really important to see if you do anything repetitively that you might not notice when you're just talking to someone, but is very noticeable when you're one-on-one talking to someone else. And another seemingly random but important piece of feedback I got was that I had answered a very common question based on equally common advice given about that question. Something that they love to ask is like, what is your biggest flaw? Like, what's your biggest advantage and what's your biggest flaw? And the advice I had been given previously when I was younger was to try to come up with something that's like not actually a flaw. Like say that you're ambitious, that's your flaw. Don't do that. I had not really thought that deeply into like why that question is asked. I just always remembered that advice that I was given. But it's really important to show self-reflection. So that question allows you to first address what your weakness is. For example, in undergrad, I really struggled with time management as well as self-advocacy. Second, discuss how you worked on that weakness. In the past, I started advocating for myself more. Instead of working full time, I cut my hours down. When I was asked to work overtime, I would say no. And I just really worked on making sure I had my schedule down. And then lastly, cover how you plan to keep working on it, because that shows that like you're still capable of growth and you're still working towards that. My last piece of advice about medical school interviews is to make sure that you know what style interview you're going into. It could be multiple mini interviews, it could be a traditional interview. So be prepared to answer those style of questions and make sure that your mock interviews match that style as well. And lastly, be prepared to ask meaningful questions to your interviewer that show you're interested in the school. I had gotten a few from Dr. Gray's interview book and asked my friend about those. And she recommended that I did not use those. So I came up with some different questions. You do not want these questions to be something that you have found from their website. Like, you don't want to ask a question that you could easily find out through a Google search. You want it to be a little more in-depth. For example, I asked about the University of Louisville has a global health distinction tract. Something that I'm really interested in is global health. So that's what I decided to ask about. But a good rule of thumb is to have 3 questions ready to go. And that's all I've got about the interview.
I just want to quickly add something for the med school interviews. Make sure to know your rights. This isn't something that's like talked about as much, but knowing what interviewers can and can't ask you about. I've heard like horror stories of women being asked like, how do you plan on working as a physician while trying to raise kids? And nowhere in their application did they say that they want kids or that they have them or anything. So even if it was an open application, that's not something you're able to be asked. So make sure you kind of have a way out in terms of answers. Try to be respectful, but also be firm. You know, like this isn't a good question. You know, like this isn't representative of who I am, and it has nothing to do with my passion for medicine. And so just be prepared for crazy things like that because it can happen and it always does. And hopefully none of you will have to experience it, but it's something to have on the brain for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. The next question is, any advice on how to make your application stand out when applying to college or medical school?
I'll take a stab at this one. I think applying to, okay, so there's 2 different strategies for both applying to college and versus applying for medical school. When applying to college, a lot of colleges want to see that you are a good fit for their school. So it's particularly what major you are. So I know Rachel mentioned that she always wanted to go into neuroscience. If you are someone like Rachel who does you want to go into neuroscience, then show your passion for neuroscience. Be very specific about it. And think about it in that way, and is that if you're trying to become a certain major, you want to show strengths that someone in that major might show. So take that strategy with your college applications and not only writing, I know for some schools they have insight questions, other schools have personal statements, but take that strategy in showing how you fit into that major and you fit into that school. For medical school, I actually think it's a little bit different. I think ultimately what medical schools want to see is that, one, you want to go into medicine, you want to become a physician. So the 2 questions that I feel like must be answered in every single medical school application is, who are you and why do you want to become a physician? And specifically the who are you is the question I think a lot of people forget about, is because especially as a pre-med, we're so wrapped up in getting clinical experience, getting research, getting publications, all these accolades. And that's kind of something that Elise talked about a little bit in her interview portion, was that you really have to know yourself. You really have to be able to present yourself well, because ultimately the medical school, they're looking for diverse perspectives. There's no one type of mold that makes a good physician. So being yourself and presenting your passions strongly and eloquently will ultimately make you a strong applicant for medical school. This is beyond the fact that you need a good GPA, which I argue against that, and that you need a good Mcat score. I'll also argue against that. But generally speaking, I do think that if you are passionate about going into the field of medicine, you can show that in your activities and you present yourself well. That will make you a great applicant for medical school. So those are the two different perspectives for the two applications.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add on a little bit about this topic?
I'd just like to reiterate, like, showing and not telling during your writing all the parts of your application. I know Tiffany just kind of hit on that, but really it's the most important part when you're writing your personal statement and activities, and then your secondaries as well. You'll figure that out though, because they tend to show a lot of favor towards all of the different personal statements and everything that are written in a showing and not telling way, because they don't want to read something that bores them to death. They want to be kind of taken on a journey, and specifically your journey.
All right, thank you. The next question is, how do you stay motivated when you want to give up? And all of you guys can answer this question.
I can start. So my long story short is the reason why I started my Instagram account was to share the journey of me overcoming failing OChem twice. I didn't see a lot of people out there talking about struggling in classes and struggling in general. So that's why I started my Instagram page. And I'll be honest, the world of pre-med is very competitive and you'll feel very lonely at times because people don't like to talk about our struggles. We only like to talk about the number of publications we have or the 4.0 GPA or etc. But how do you stay motivated? Well, how I stay motivated in particular is I always ground myself in the reasons why I want to become a physician. And I constantly remind myself in the activities that I do. So I know that right now during the pandemic, not a lot of us can go out and volunteer and be with patients, but perhaps in some ways, like researching more about the patient population that you want to impact one day. That's a good way to remind yourself of, why you are on this path to become a physician is to help these people in this way. Educate yourself so that you can better educate others on this patient population you hope to impact. I'm a big fan of positive affirmations, like Pinterest posts, nice looking pictures that, like can inspire you when you're not feeling great while studying. So, finding little ways to remind yourself of your purpose and why you're on this path is really important because the journey is long and no one ever said that getting into medical school is easy. I highly doubt anyone will ever say that. So finding those little ways to motivate yourself, whether it be physically, whether it be, physically, in posters or in letterboards, etc., or, mentally, saying nice things about yourself or saying like, I'm going to get that 525 on the Mcat, or I'm going to get into this med school that I've been dreaming about. All these different types of things are what will propel you through this journey. I can say from experience that it's not easy. And I know my fellow panelists can say the same thing, that we've all hit our struggles, whether or not we talk about them today or not. So you really just want to continue to try to inspire yourself by not only self-motivating yourself, but also finding other mentors and social media pages or whoever else that you look up to, feeling inspired by them and reminding yourself of that.
I totally agree with Tiffany. I struggled a whole heck of a lot in undergrad. I did not do super well. My science GPA was low enough that it was below the cutoff. I did not do well. I'm not proud of that, but I'm not ashamed to say that because I was working full time. There were extenuating circumstances, and we all struggle. Like we talked about earlier, college is a big adjustment. So there were plenty of times that I wanted to give up, I promise. I had people telling me left and right I was never going to be a doctor, that I needed to look at backup plans. And I spent a lot of time in undergrad looking at backup plans when I should have been spending that time investing it into the goal that I wanted in my future. So I completely agree that it's so important to look at your future goals. I spent a lot of time shadowing. I loved my clinical job because I was able to be with patients every day and kind of be reminded of why I wanted to do this. Of course, like Tiffany said, that's not as possible right now. So finding other ways to do that is important. Virtual shadowing, just kind of reminding yourself of why you're doing this, which is also good reflection for your personal statement, by the way. And for example, I know Tiffany said she loves like motivational quotes. For my master's program, we have like a block system. And so during cardio block, I love Grey's Anatomy. I'm not ashamed of that. I have 2 dogs. They're named Gray and Sloan. I printed out a picture of Christina Yang, who is like a cardiothoracic surgeon. And the quote is something along the lines of like, everyone has a bad day, but like get out of bed. Because I need tough love sometimes. And I hung that in my room above my desk. And I looked at it every day. And that helped me. And we all have different things that help us stay motivated, kind of like day to day, task to task. I also kept a little picture of Christina Yang in my planner. That's a little nerdy, a little embarrassing, but it's okay. I think it's just important to kind of find the little things like that that help you kind of make it through each day, and also looking at your big overall goals to keep you going more long term. I feel like I had something I was going to say and I kind of forgot what it was. But yes, it was something kind of piggybacking off of Tiffany, who is amazing. If I remember it, I'll come back to it after Rachel.
Y'all have hit literally everything. So this is going to be a little rough. Personally, I stay motivated by trying my best to remember this is going to sound really weird, everything that has come in my way since starting this journey, and how I have yet to quit and let it stop me. You know, it might stumble me for a little bit, it might make me reconsider, but I have never wanted to flat out give up, because I know this is what I want more than anything. If I think to myself, what else would I do? There's literally no other option. You know, I'm good at many things and I love making art, you know, as per my artsy med name, but never in my life have I thought that that's what I wanted to do with my life, because my goal in life is essentially to help people, specifically lower socioeconomic communities. And so I think that's really something that you have to figure out for yourself, of course. Your why is going to be different from everyone else's, but also remembering that you're like super awesome and you've gone through so many different things, or you will in college, most likely. And it's okay to struggle, for sure. Most people do. And it's important that you don't let it stop you from chasing these dreams that you have, because becoming a physician is incredible. And it's a long journey. And sometimes, like Tiffany said, it can be lonely. But I think collaboration over everything, making sure you have your friends, and you know, I have now Instagram, a whole little community of people who have gone through really similar things and also want that same community as well, to know that they're not the only ones struggling. And I think that's really important as well. So identify those struggles and just remember, dude, you're awesome. Like, you've gotten through it and you'll get through it again, and you'll keep getting through it until you're a physician, and then you'll get through, I guess, some new challenges. But yeah.
All right.
I remember what I wanted to
Go
say.
ahead.
So sorry. In regards to the fact that I did super bad in undergrad, and basically all of my advisors, mentors, etc., telling me to give up. My advice to y'all is just to keep going. If you had told me 4 years ago that after getting C's in every single chemistry class that I took, all of them, that I would make it to a master's program and somehow pull off a 4.0. I still don't really know how I've done that, but like, and I'm not telling you that because a 4.0 is important. It's really not. But what I want you to take away from that is that like you can have 400 people tell you that you're not good enough, and you can turn around and still do that. Just because someone tells you that you're not capable does not mean that that's true. I still struggle with my studies. It doesn't mean that like class is easy for me now, but I found this environment that is healthier, that's more supportive. I've got mentorship, like Rachel and Tiffany said, this incredible Instagram community, where I love that there are like so many people that are willing to share like, yeah, we have failed on this path, and that's okay because we didn't give up. We kept going, and you can absolutely succeed in medical school after getting a C in all of your chemistry classes. So I think that's just like my one big main takeaway, because I didn't feel like I had people supporting me when I was younger. And there were definitely days where it was harder not to give up, just looking at like my stats and what people were saying to me. But definitely, if this is what you want to do, just like keep going.
Thank you guys so much for sharing the ways you guys stayed motivated. You've really inspired me for sure. All right, so now it's time for our live Q&A session. So if anyone has any questions, you can type it in the chat box. And then Elise, Tiffany, and Rachel can answer your questions.
Ooh, what type of person would thrive as a neuroscience major? Eva, thank you for that. Wow, let's see. Honestly, most neuroscience majors that I know are artsy. And I think that's really interesting. They seem to be really creative. They, I guess, kind of enjoy the interdisciplinary type of major that is neuroscience. That's honestly why I love it, because I was able to get a little bit of everything that I love, whether from the really cool parts of biology, like neuroendocrinology, or philosophy. I've had a couple of really amazing, like essentially philosophy of neuroscience or cognitive science courses that have been amazing and have shaped me in really great ways, but have also had classes in chemistry and psychology, which is really great. So I think, I don't know, I guess if you think you would enjoy all of those different things, I think someone who is at least interested in all of those different aspects would be great for neuroscience. I think someone who's open and creative, like I said, will probably flourish in that way. As long as you have some sort of a passion for STEM, you will probably find some place in neuroscience to fall in love with. But yeah.
I see like 3 sort of questions that are kind of correlated, so I'll try to like answer those in a succinct way. Balancing a social life, things that we do to de-stress, and then like the knitting and crocheting. We all have passions outside of medicine. Rachel loves art. I know, Tiffany, you've got other hobbies, obviously, like we all do. I don't think we've ever talked about that personally, but I just know that you have them. Like balance is so important. I think we've all got this kind of like picture in our head of balance must look like school or work 9 to 5 and having the rest of the time for whatever it is you do outside of school. I kind of had to throw away that idea of balance to really be able to like be healthy and thrive. because balance is really more of like everyday thing. Like some days you're gonna have to spend more time studying. Like you might have an exam coming up. Other days you might be able to take like the whole weekend off and go on a road trip with your friends. Um, so I think like I've had to look at balance as more of an overall thing than trying to make sure like every day is balanced in the same kind of way. Some things that I do to de-stress and have a social life are I love to go on walks with friends in a socially distant manner nowadays. um, I love art as well. I love music. I recently restarted doing dance classes that I'm taking online, which is really fun. So just kind of making sure that you schedule in the time for that. Like if you know you've got exams coming up, take a realistic look at how much you need to study for those, but also make sure that you're scheduling in time on your busier weeks to be able to see friends and just do the things that you enjoy. As it pertains to like knitting and crocheting or any other kind of hobby you have, I don't think you really need to like bring that back to medicine, if that makes sense. Like you are allowed to have hobbies that you just like enjoy doing that have nothing to do with medicine. Um, like I think we have this kind of habit to say like, oh, how can I like turn this into being something good for medical school? Which of course you can do that. I talked about my art. I make like clay jewelry. I talked about that in my med school interview. I actually used that as one of my activities because I had like a small business on the side. You can definitely talk about that, but I think it's important to know that like you're allowed to do things that you enjoy, and it doesn't have to be checking off a box like Tiffany said. You're allowed to just enjoy your life too.
I actually wanted to answer one of the questions that was asked. Is it worth spending 8 to 10 years more to pursue becoming a physician versus going into some other career that has similar benefits? I'll tell you, honestly, my partner is an engineer. He's out here making money, and I'm sitting here studying for the Mcat. So yes, I think obviously we all have those moments of doubt. But what I will say is, when you find your purpose as to why you want to become a physician, and for some of us it takes longer than others. For me in particular, like it took me having to sit there literally with an attorney across from me asking me like, do I want to go to law school, for me to realize that no, my passion actually lies with becoming a physician. But once you find that purpose, honestly, is spending an additional 8 years, or 4 years medical school, 3 years of residency, or an additional for fellowship, that doesn't necessarily deter you. And it's the same thing actually with the same idea with gap years, because both technically Elise and I are both non-traditional pre-med, so we've taken additional time from college and for when we'll go on to be applying and entering medical school. Additional time is not a big issue if you know that becoming a physician is what you want to do and you have a purpose behind it. So yes, I do think spending the additional 8 to 10 years to becoming a physician is worth it, because for me, that's how I best want to impact the patients that I care about. And I also wanted to add for the crocheting and the knitting question that just to echo off Elise, that not all your hobbies have to be about medicine. They don't have to relate to medicine. But if you wanted it to relate to medicine, there are always ways. So for example, I would say one of my main hobbies is my Instagram. It's kind of become that, unfortunately. It's become like an all-encompassing thing. And so I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it, but it's not really directly related to medicine, but I created a mentorship program through it, and I mentor now like 200 strangers off Instagram. So even though it's not directly related to medicine, it is in a sense connecting me to people that I want to help, which are students my age. So there are always ways to connect your hobby to something medically related. It's not necessarily medically related, but it's more related to who you are as a person. And as I said previously, medical schools want to see who you are as a person. So if you're really passionate about something and you want to take it far, just go for it.
I see someone asked, if it makes a difference what school you go to for undergrad, I don't think so. While I didn't enjoy my time at Murray State as much as I love my time at Case, I'm not going to like wholly blame my entire experience and my failures on my school. I wish that I had had better advisors. I wish that I had done a little more research into majors that I would enjoy before I really made the switch to pre-med. I didn't really know what I was doing, but you can absolutely get into medical school either if you're going to like a smaller liberal arts college, if you're at like a big school like Case, you can absolutely still have a great experience. Just so long as you're in an environment where like you can thrive, if that makes sense. That just doesn't necessarily mean like that's not going to be the same for everyone is what I'm saying. I wish I'd had like some kind of physiology major in undergrad. That wasn't really an option. Or like neuroscience like Rachel, that sounds really fascinating. So I think that's one thing I would look into, as well as just the environment, if there are extracurriculars that you like would enjoy, even like the city that you'd be living in, if you'd have a support system. But I don't think you really need to worry about like at this juncture anyway, you know, if I go to this school, am I like not going to get into medical school?
Actually, I wanted to answer one of these questions that I thought was really interesting. And this is a good question, actually, based off what Rachel had said about the interview portion. As a woman in the medical field, did you face any discrimination? If yes, how do you deal with it? All the time. And I don't know if any of you are following the news currently, but there's been recently a lot of anti-Asian hate crimes recently. How do you handle that type of stuff? You learn to be professional about it, and you learn how to be firm and say your piece without offending others. I think ultimately, a lot of times when things like this happen, a lot of time, I mean, as Rachel had previously said when she was answering the interview portion, people will ask you like, how do you expect to be a mom? Or how do you expect to have kids while becoming a physician? Other things people will ask is like, you know, they'll make insensitive comments. They may not realize are insensitive, but you know, they're kind of brash based upon what they might be thinking, or they're not thinking about what they're saying to you. Just being professional about it. Kind of shutting down the question and just saying like, you know, I don't think this is an appropriate question, but I would love to talk more about my passion for helping the homeless, or my passion into, you know, cardiac surgery techniques, stuff like that. So flipping it to make it more about you and being polite in that aspect and avoiding the question is important. As for, you know, just general discrimination, I mean, unfortunately, you're going to face discrimination in the medical field, whether it be being bypassed for certain promotions or being bypassed for publications, leadership opportunities, etc. When that's happened to me, I used to internalize it a lot. But honestly, looking back upon it and reflecting upon it further, one of the best ways to hit back at some of those people is being successful with or without those people, and with or without that position. And so, you know, if I had taken that road of just being solely fixated on that position, I wouldn't have achieved what I've achieved now. So really take those hits at your character, at your personality, or who you are, and use them again to fuel you, to help you rise up to what you hope to become.
Someone asked if I have to submit my master program grades when applying to medical school. The simple answer, yes. Any college grades that you have, even like classes that you took in high school through a college, like a community college, you have to like submit all of it. But as like a more in-depth answer, that kind of plays into like SMP versus regular masters versus like DIY postbac, I think. And I know Tiffany is doing a DIY postbac, which is an incredible option. Unfortunately, I personally had like 180 credits in undergrad because I switched my major so late. So I couldn't just retake classes and like make a dent in my GPA. Unfortunately, I wish I could have. So I chose the option of doing like a special master's program just because I knew I needed to show that I was capable of taking upper level classes, just to try to sort of offset my undergrad GPA in a sense. I will say master's grades are not averaged in with your undergrad GPAs. So these classes are counted as separate. And you may be thinking, then why is that beneficial? It shows like an upward trend. So I might have done not too hot in undergrad, and my master's program might not count into that GPA, but they can see that I'm taking like medical school level classes right now and succeeding in those. So I just wanted to take like half a second to like sort of explain that. But choosing like a post-bac or like a master's program totally just depends on like your past, your classes, and like what your needs are.
There's actually a really good question that asked, so we had touched upon what makes us stand out, but for applications, what type of stories from the past should we use? I feel like a lot of people will talk about their shadowing clinical experiences or normal extracurriculars. That's very much so. If you're, like I had previously said, you should be doing extracurriculars or clinical experiences that are very meaningful and impactful to you. And so to kind of touch upon the point that Rachel had made with shadowing, when you're post you leaving a certain activity, whether it be your job as a CNA or your shift at the free clinic, if you have a patient experience that you really that is memorable and that really hits home as to why you want to become a physician, journal it down. And these are perfect moments to put in your personal statement or to put in your activity descriptions for medical school. Other types of stories you could bring up is your personal reason why for medicine. So I know for Elise, she mentioned her father. For me personally, my family went through a pretty traumatic experience where, we nearly went homeless. So for me, that is something that I touched upon a lot in my own personal statement, because that very much correlates with why I went on to help, the homeless population in my county, and why I'm so passionate about community service. So personal stories like that, it doesn't necessarily have to just revolve around you specifically. It just has to like kind of show like why do you tick the way you do. So personal family stories, or even another way to potentially put it is perhaps you have a passion for something. You have a passion for art, and so you can tie that into why do you want to pursue medicine. And maybe Rachel can elaborate more on that, but using your passion for art, starting off with that in your personal statement and slowly tying it into why you think medicine is an art. So those are different ways that you can write your personal statement, and not necessarily have to hit on the traditional shadowing clinical experience or extracurriculars. Though I actually do like this question as well. Do you learn the culture of medicine and racial disparities in med school, or do you need to learn it on your own? This is a really great question. And actually for me in particular, I'm very passionate about racial and medical disparities, healthcare disparities. My Instagram is devoted to a lot of that. I educate my following on these type of topics, because I do think that there is a lack of education on healthcare disparities in medical schools. And so for me in particular, because I care about it a lot, while I'm making my school list currently to apply, I'm looking at schools that have healthcare disparity training in their curriculum. And perhaps if that's something that you're interested in doing, that's something you can also look into the medical schools as well. It is becoming more prevalent that healthcare disparities and racial disparities, implicit bias training is being incorporated into curriculums. But for the most part, I would say most medical students have to learn on their own, if not take a specialized class for it, because it's not well ingrained into the medical school curriculum at this point.
All right, are there any other questions?
I saw kind of a fun one, if anybody wants to take a crack at it. It says, what specialty are you guys planning to study? I have no clue. I have a lot of different interests. I for sure know, and it's not really a specialty, it's just something afterwards that I'd like to kind of go into. I am really hoping to be a physician that uses their experiences to cultivate and make new public health policies that hopefully work for the betterment of all lower socioeconomic communities. But that's just me. But something I've now become very interested in has actually been OBGYN work. I think it's just super interesting and beautiful. And that's something I'll have to kind of figure out, I guess, through med school. It doesn't mean I can't do it, or that maybe I don't know, like I'll change my mind. It's totally possible. But that is something I am currently interested in. But I don't know, neurology is super cool as well. I originally thought I wanted to be a doctor to be of course, a neurosurgeon. I feel like a lot of people think that, and then they start looking into it and they're like, oh, this takes forever. And it's long hours. It's very hard on you. It's very taxing, but I still think it's very interesting. I'm not sure I'd want to do it, but I guess we'll see, you know? I don't know. What about Elise and Tiffany? What are y'all thinking?
I definitely am interested in a lot of things. I have been able to shadow in a lot of areas. If you asked me a couple years ago, I would be very sure that I would either want to be a neonatologist or an obstetrician. I currently work with Global Initiative Against HPV and Cervical Cancer. And I really love being able to use that platform to share information about healthcare disparities that affect those with cervixes globally around the world. But I have been able to get more involved in cardio. I think that when I was younger, I thought I would hate cardio, probably both because of my father's heart condition, and I thought maybe it would just be like a little cheesy, you know, to say like, yes, my dad died of like a heart condition and I want to go into cardio. But that was really silly. I ended up taking our cardio block last semester and now getting involved in cardiac surgery research, and I love it. It's something that I never would have seen myself doing, but I enjoy it a lot. I do think I know at this point, I really enjoy surgery. I think there's just something about like the instant gratification for me of being able to physically like see what you're doing. I think that really just differs for everyone. I'm keeping my options open because a lot of the time you change your mind. So I think it's important to like have an open mind and know that even though you might really, really like one specialty, you might enjoy something completely different even more.
Yeah, as for myself, I think a lot of people are placing bets about where I end up going because so ultimately my goal is to open my own free clinic. I'm really passionate about helping bring healthcare more, make it more accessible, more inclusive. So I want to open my own free clinic one day. So I won't say that I'm sure yet, but I am heavily leaning towards like family medicine or internal med, just because that's been most of my exposure. And I think that is like the most broad of the specialties to work with the amount of patients that I want to work with. So I would say probably family med or internal med at this point.
Awesome. So unfortunately, that's all the time we have today for all the questions. However, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to these guys. Here are their Instagrams on the screen. And also make sure to follow us on Instagram to learn about our upcoming conferences and events. And thank you guys so much for attending. I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Hope to see you all as colleagues one day.
Thanks, guys.